process look? They just sort of serve you with, you get a letter or something that just says, hey, we're kicking you out, and how much notice do they give you, and what's the status? What is there, just a,
Yeah, so
how does that
uh,
work?
I'm still actually trying to conceptualize how it happened because it was so chaotic and so dehumanizing. So the executive order was issued, but of course, the executive order takes time to percolate through the policy channels, right? So executive order is issued in January. It was end of January or early February when DoD and then Air Force, or different service policies started to come out. So that took a few months. Like, we knew it was coming, of course, when Trump got elected in November. So we were ready for it, kind of making plans, starting to think about it, right, as a community. The but basically there was this really dehumanizing back and forth where I was, like, there was no recourse. There was no way that I could say, like, hey, like, I could challenge this, right? There, essentially the choice given to, it was slightly different for officers versus enlisted people, and it was slightly different across services, but I can at least speak to the Air Force one very intimately. It was We were given a choice as officers, like, if you voluntarily separate, you'll get an honorable discharge with nothing interesting or on your DD 214. But if you want to stay and fight, then we'll have to send you to a board of inquiry, essentially to say, are you trans? And not to say, like, do you deserve to be here, or has your service been honorable? And in addition to that, if you if you decide to stay and fight after whatever date that this was, and the date kept moving, so I'm not trying to be to obfuscate, because the date kept moving, and it was like multiple, maybe it's going to be August, maybe it's September, maybe it's April, we don't know. Like, it kind of kept going back and forth. But if like, the threat was either leave voluntarily, or we will slap you with a discharge code that was like a JDK code. It's an administrative thing. What does it mean? It means that you're a risk to national security because of how, like, whatever your behavior is so risky that we should never hire you, right? So there was no real choice for many of us. So a lot of us got out, quote unquote, voluntarily. I'm in that group. I was like, look, I don't want to do this anymore. I fought long enough. I fought for several months to try to keep my job, to try to stay in. But I'm like, look, I don't want to, I don't care about this organization enough at this point. Like, I realized that they're not going to fight for me. So why would I stick around, have them slap me with a potentially, like, something that could make me unemployable, and potentially, like, always on a list, right? Which I'm sure I'm sure I'm on a list regardless. But yeah, so it was a very chaotic time. They kept trying to essentially forcefully detransition people. They said, hey, if you come into work, you have to come in your birth gender standards. So they would have tried to make me cut my hair and go in under male standards, which I found to be contrary to my human dignity, right? Some trans people said, like, hey, you know what, I'll take that deal. I'm just trying to fly under the radar. But the problem was, there was no, like, maybe you can detransition and stay in option. It was just, we're going to detransition you, and then we're going to kick you out. You know,
I mean, even if you had been willing to go along with that, there still was no guarantee that you'd be able to stay in for.
on the contrary, even if I did go along with that, there was still a guarantee that I would get kicked out.
Okay.
So it was extraordinarily dehumanizing. And all the research behind, like, forcing trans people to not be themselves. So it's essentially, like, you've seen studies on conversion therapy, things like that. That is just extraordinarily hard on people's mental health. And I'm not trying to I'll try to keep this as broad as possible, but the trans people that I knew, many of them ended up in, like, with extremely difficult mental health situations. Some of them tried to hurt themselves. Some of them, so that they had to navigate that. And we as a community had to navigate that. Like, hey, if somebody essentially is trying to force you to be something you're not, then this is going to cause some pretty, significant harm, right? And so, that's not over. That's still happening, right? There are some trans people that are actually still in the military. They're still in this process and, like, fighting to stay in. I decided that for me, the best option was to leave the military so that I could have a more free voice, so that I could speak more. When you saw me, I was still in the Air Force at the last VFP conference last year, so I had to be a little bit more limited in what I said. Right. I decided, like, hey, you know what, this isn't for me. I'd like to be able to get out, use my voice, and do the best I can to try to fight for people's rights. And I can't do that if I'm stuck in this system.